Welcome to Rite Gud, the podcast that helps you write good. I'm R.S. Benedict. In this episode, we're talking about the art of translation. With me today is speculative fiction author Mário Seabra Coelho. Thanks for coming on the show. I understand that you work as a translator in addition to writing original fiction. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I became a translator because I wanted to write fiction in English, partially. My reasoning was that if I fail as a writer, I'll have a backup job. The only way for me to actually become a spec fic writer and make money off it would be to write in English, because the Portuguese market is next to non-existent. So, yeah, I was trying to conciliate both things, the translation and writing, and it ended up being a good idea. Nowadays, I'm a freelance translator full-time, even though I don't work full-time, to be fair. I'm lazy.
Right.
But yeah, that's how I started. The first thing I ever sold was actually a translation. I never told Stranger Horizons that, but it was a translation of a Portuguese story.
Oh, neat.
So yeah, my Portuguese story, obviously.
Oh, cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Has translation made you a stronger writer?
Yeah, I'd say so. Well, there are drawbacks, obviously, but yeah. In general, I'd say it helps. I think the main reason it helps is because I can just plagiarize a really strong corpus of expressions and vocabulary, and nobody will know. I can just sound really smart when I make shit up, and sometimes I'm literally just using Portuguese expressions. So yeah, that's the main reason. Yeah, and obviously it helps to create that strange effect when I'm trying to sound a bit uncanny. That's how I sound normally, I guess. So for certain types of fiction, especially weird fiction, it does help to be, a second language writer / someone who sometimes writes in both languages at the same time, and I translate myself into both at the end. So yeah.
I am not at all a professional translator, but I've done translation projects just as part of my studies, just as part of school projects and stuff back in college, and I found that it really does help you become a better writer just purely as a writing exercise.
Yeah.
Like, you get different metaphors, different similes, different ways of describing things that you just wouldn't use in your native language, and it's really exciting and strange and eye-opening. Like, I don't know, say if I studied a bit of Greek, there's this phrase used in Homer over and over again, the wine dark sea. And it's like not a thing that an English speaker would ever think to say, to compare the color of the ocean to the color of wine.
Oh, yeah.
But it's this really beautiful phrase that's so evocative, and just any foreign language is full of these little things that are just standard and normal in that language, but in your own language, in the target language, you'd never do that, and it's so exciting to come across it. And for me, I think in my perspective, in a way, all writing is a form of translation in a way.
Yeah, you're translating images, obviously, into words.
Right.
So yeah.
There's this wordless story in your head, and you have to put it into words on a page. And then your reader is trying to translate your words into their own wordless story in their head.
It's kind of like the telepathy, in a way, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a very clumsy kind of telepathy. Yeah. So I think that all writers should attempt translation, even if you're not very good in the language you're translating from, even if you just got to sit there with a dictionary and slowly, painfully work it out. I think it's a really, really valuable exercise, and I think it can make you into a stronger and much more interesting writer.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like people are sometimes a little bit afraid of doing that because, this might be just me, but they seem to be afraid of penetrating another culture, so to speak. Like maybe they don't want to sound insensitive or something. But I'd be more than flattered if somebody tried to translate Portuguese into English. A native English speaker, if they research Portuguese and try to incorporate whatever they like into their English writing. So I think it's flattering, and I think most people, obviously this is a generalization, but I think most second language speakers would feel the same, because we're starved for representation, and it's flattering when somebody likes our language especially.
Yeah, and I mean, you're showing, hey, I love this thing so much, I want to share it, and to like put the time in to really try and make this work. Like that's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, learning another language
that
terrible.
Very much a labor of love.
Yeah.
So one of the issues that I find when I'm trying to translate is just how much do you stick to the original versus how much do you change?
Sorry, that's the crux of it for the most part.
Yeah, that's, I mean, the whole thing of it.
Yeah,
like,
it is.
How much do you change? If you stick to the original too much, then there's shit that the audience is just not going to understand, and they might not be able to really appreciate it. But if you change it too much, then it's like you're watering it down, and maybe you're kind of babying your readers a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Obviously, I got that issue both in my actual job and fiction. When I'm translating myself, that's not a question. I just do whatever I want, since I have the explicit authorization of the author, being myself.
Right.
But it depends whether I'm doing a technical translation or whether I'm translating fiction. When I'm translating fiction, sometimes I actually just send an email to the author being like, hey, what do you mean with this? Or do you mind if I translate this loosely so it sounds better in Portuguese? That's happened to me a couple times, even though for the most part authors don't really answer their emails. But
right.
And when it's technical stuff, I try to stick as close to the original as I can, because I'm afraid of making a mistake and killing somebody by mistranslating some instruction, how to deal with a very heavy machine, something like that. So it really depends. But I think the important thing is before you even start translating, you try to understand what a goal of the text is. So for instance, if I'm translating poetry, I believe for the most part the goal is beauty, I guess. It's the aesthetics of it. So I think the poet, the original author, will want me to make it as pretty as I can, so to speak. I don't think it makes much sense to translate it literally and then completely erase all the lyricism. So it's hard though, because it really depends on the author. It kind of reminds me of, do you know the book Hex by Thomas Hewvold? I don't know how to pronounce his name. He's Dutch, I think.
I don't think I know that book. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a horror book. It's a very famous book in the Netherlands, and it was translated into English, and surprisingly it actually sold well, because usually translations don't sell very well. But the thing he did is that he actually completely changed the text, to transposed it into America. The original story is set in the Netherlands, and he changed all the names, all the locations. So now in English it's set in New York. So in that sense, what he did is he tried to naturalize the translation, try to make it sound as natural as possible to the reader, or to the English language reader. I'm not a big fan of doing that for the most part, because I think it's completely fine if a translation and the original work have different effects on the reader. I don't think it's an issue. Like, for instance, sometimes I write stuff set in Portugal. I write it in English, but I write a story that's set in Lisbon or something like that. And I'm aware that it's going to sound somewhat exotic for an English native. And it's going to sound completely mundane to a Portuguese reader. And I'm fine with that, because I don't think we should try and make the text have the same effect in readers all over, because that's not going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are readers who are kind of turned off by, oh, it's so strange, it's foreign. But then again, at least for me, part of the joy is the strangeness of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I feel that strangeness in English, for instance, obviously, very often.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of American culture is just fucking weird.
Yeah, for sure.
And nonsensical.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
Which you don't realize when you're steeped in it.
Yeah,
I guess.
like for instance, how Southerners talk, like, like in Texas and stuff. I'm guessing it sounds completely, I don't even know, but I'm guessing you guys have completely different stereotypes than I do, or the effect is completely different, because to me it just sounds fascinating, like when you say the y'all and etc. It's cool to me. Obviously, I think a lot of people in America are going to find that that's a bit lowbrow or something that...
a lot of Northerners really look down on it.
Yeah, I don't by nature, because to me it just sounds different. Obviously, I also share some of the stereotypes unconsciously. I'm guessing it's going to affect me too. But yeah, it's completely different. Obviously, that happens in translation too. Like, if I did that, because the south of Portugal is a little bit the same. I think most countries, apparently the south is looked down by other regions. Yeah. And it's kind of the same in Portugal. The stereotypes are benign in this case, because the Southerners are just funny to us. Yeah. Also, and it works inverted over here, because Southerners are the actual communists in this country. Well, not actual communists, but they vote for the Communist Party. So yeah, it's cool how it works complete the opposite way in America. But yeah. So if I was writing a story about Portuguese Southerners, obviously it'd be completely impossible to emulate what I'm trying to do in English. Like, there's no frame of reference. It's totally impossible. So if I want the reader to appreciate it, the English language reader, I just have to go about it a completely different way. I could either transpose it into American culture, and I don't like doing that for the most part, or I just have to make it fun in some other way. It has to work without the references, I guess.
Yeah, and that brings us to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is just coping with the untranslatable. Like, sometimes if you're trying to translate something, there's shit that just does not translate to the next language. So either you have to find some sort of local equivalent, like with accent. I mean, an American is not going to know the difference between like a northern and a southern Portuguese accent.
Yeah, of course.
I have no idea that's northern, southern Portuguese culture. So like, how do you translate that? Do you just stick to it, or do you like sort of use American style regional accents that are roughly culturally equivalent, even though there's not really a cultural equivalence?
Well, with accents it's difficult. I usually just ignore it, to be fair. Like my MA project was translating not sure if you know this book. It's called Super Sad True Love Story by Gary Steingart. I translated part of that book, and I translated Rent by Chuck Palahniuk, or I don't know how to pronounce his name. But yeah, I translated part of that, and Rent, I don't know which state it's set in.
New York State, right? New York City.
Yeah, I think they just all speak like y'all, and it's, I don't know. Obviously, I couldn't translate that into Portuguese. We don't really have an equivalent, I guess. So I just flat out ignored it, to be fair, because there's nothing I can do. I think we can compensate in other ways. It's just something that people sometimes forget during the translation process, is that you can improve upon the original sometimes. There are things that don't exist in English and don't exist in Portuguese, and sometimes we see an opportunity to use that. Like, for instance, English doesn't use suffixation as we do in Portuguese. Like, for instance, the ending of a word in Portuguese can completely change the connotation. For instance, if you want to call someone... Let me think of an example. Let's say little girl, for instance. In English, you're going to say little girl. The word is always girl. Maybe you can sometimes say girly or something. No, that's the adjective. You're going to always use girl. Then you might use an adjective to characterize girl. In Portuguese, what you can do is that you can change the ending of the word. So, for instance, the word for girl in Portuguese is either rapariga or menina. And let's go with rapariga because it's easier in this case. You can say, instead of rapariga, you can say rapariguita. So ita is a suffix, and it wouldn't, in this case, it would mean little girl, for instance. So you don't have to use an adjective. You can just say rapariguita, or you can do the opposite. You can say raparigona. So ona in this case would be an augmentative. So you wouldn't have to say big girl. You can just change the ending of the word, and this works beautifully for fiction because you can throw 10 of these in a row And obviously in English, if you're doing little girl, big girl, this girl, la la la, it's gonna end up sounding awkward. You're just throwing an adjective for every word. But in Portuguese, you can do this, and it sounds completely natural. And there are opportunities to do this when we're translating. I do this a lot when translating English into Portuguese. Sometimes for instance, I notice that the character is being condescending. You can use the diminutive suffixes to make it sound condescending. So sometimes you can add into the translation, and you can improve upon the original. And I think that makes up for the things that you do end up losing in translation. So I think it's certain parts of the text are going to be stronger than the original. Other parts are going to be weaker. But I think translators are they're very afraid of playing with the original text, so they avoid doing this. I do it, and I think it works. And I think for the most part, writers don't really care that much about translators being faithful. I think they just want their books to be read, and to be entertaining to the public, and to sound well.
Right.
Obviously, maybe not all writers think like this.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure some writers are like, no,
yeah, exactly.
obey every word, literally. Just like, okay, calm down.
Yeah, that's happened to me a couple of times, actually. But yeah.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
And in some instances, like, if you're translating this ancient text that's considered really, like, important, it can be so intimidating. Like, if you're translating Homer, it's like, I can't mess with Homer. It's Homer. He's so important. But, like, I tried doing some translation with Homer, and I just felt like, who the fuck am I to, like, try to improve on Homer? You know, I'm just some idiot. But, like, when I was working with Aristophanes plays are these really silly, horny comedies with a lot of fart jokes. I just felt so much more comfortable playing with it and messing with it, because, like, it's fart jokes. It's fine. Who cares? And it was... I felt like I had a lot more breathing room to just, like, change things and mess with things, and the translation was so much better.
You can see that a lot with translations of Roman texts. For instance, I read a couple Stoicists, like Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, etc. And the translations, there's like 10 translations for each text, English translations in this case, because I like reading it in English better for some reason. And they'd sound completely different. Like the latest translation of Marcus Aurelius just did a really good job, and I think it just cut most sentences in half, to be fair. But it works really well, because I don't think Seneca or Marcus Aurelius wanted their texts to sound convoluted and complicated, because they were speaking to the common man very often.
Right.
And other translations just stick so close to the Latin, and they end up sounding awkward and completely unnatural. And I think we should just try and emulate what the writers want. But the writers want a certain tone for their text. So if we have to change it in our target language, you might end up actually being more faithful to the original vision of the author if you stray from the translation, from the original text.
Right. Well, let's talk about something that isn't exactly linguistic, but more cultural. Allusions. A lot of times an original work references something, an event or a person or another cultural work or a food that the audience isn't going to get. An example I'm going to use, just because it's very current, is that movie Parasite. There's this really important scene where the mom, the rich lady, asks her cook to make something, a particular noodle dish. And the translation for English they gave was ramdon and sirloin, although the original was something like something called japaguri with hanwoo beef. And it's like the foods in this are strongly associated with certain social classes in a way that Americans aren't going to pick up on. And also it was kind of weird, like they changed the name from japaguri to ramdon, even though like ramdon isn't a thing in English either. Like I just call it japaguri. I don't know what ramdon is either. Whatever.
Yeah, me neither.
So it's like the scene that's really important, and your American audience isn't gonna know exactly what it means. Like, oh, that's the expensive beef. Oh, that's like the cheap thing. I guess the American, it's like, do you do the equivalent, which I guess the American equivalent would be like Kraft macaroni and cheese with one of those like $10,000 black truffles. Yeah. Like, I guess that's what the equivalent would be, but then it's like, you're not going to eat that in Korea.
Yeah, in that specific case, I think both approaches are fine. I think you could just, translate it exactly as it is, and hope for the audience to either know, they won't obviously, but to either research it on their own, fine.
Yeah.
Maybe they will lose the reference, which is not that problematic considering it's not that important to the plot. But yeah, it's a rich detail that gets lost in translation. They can either do that or they should just go all in, whatever approach they choose. So in this case, I'm not a fan of putting ramdon in there because obviously we don't know what that is. But we do know what sirloin is, so you should just, stick to one. Maybe change ramdon to, I don't know, just noodles or something else, whatever it is. So yeah, whatever approach you choose, you should just stick to it. Don't mix it up. It's not gonna work that way.
Right. Yeah, I felt like that was almost an example of like trying to do it halfway, and it just didn't work on either side.
Yeah, exactly. And halfway never works.
Yeah, you really can't. It's just like, well, they don't know what japaguri is, so we're gonna say ramdon.
Yeah.
Like they don't know what that is either.
Yeah.
It's why.
Yeah, it's true.
I loved the movie. I thought from what I could tell, I mean, the translation worked great for me. But
Yeah.
that
I don't actually remember
like,
how they did it in Portuguese because I watched it with subtitles. Actually, I still watch every movie
Right.
with subtitles, even though by now I obviously can understand English well enough that I don't need subtitles. But I still watch every movie with
Right.
English subtitles. I watched this I watched it in the movies actually. I went to the cinema to watch Parasite and with Portuguese subtitles, and I don't really remember how they did that. Damn, actually,
Right.
I don't think I was paying attention.
for
Yeah,
me,
now I'm curious. I
was
gotta
hungry,
rewatch
so I
it.
was like paying a lot of attention to the noodles.
Yeah.
I'm like, what are those noodles? Those look good.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, movies just make me hungry in general. Yeah.
Yeah. When there's food in a movie, I get very interested.
Oh yeah, even in books. Yeah. I was reading Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch, and he talks about he describes food a lot, and obviously I don't think those dishes make any sense. To be fair, like the ingredients make no sense. It's like cow's tongue with plums, stuff like that. And like, what? Nobody would eat that. Yeah, something like that. But I just get very hungry every time I'm reading that book, even though the food is disgusting. But yeah.
Yeah, and like food is one of those things where it's basic, but it's also extremely culturally specific, and every food has this very like a lot of complex sort of cultural and historical
For sure.
stuff tied to it. And unfortunately, I think that is something that doesn't translate super well with the audience.
That's true. And when they, and people pick that up very easily. For instance, Saramago, the Portuguese writer, he wrote Blindness. He's the only Portuguese author who ever won the Nobel Prize. I think he won it probably for Blindness, actually. In Portuguese, the book is called Essay on Blindness. In English, it translated into just Blindness, which I think it's a beautiful title, to be fair. And it's about how there's this plague, and it just makes people go blind, and they call it white blindness, I think, because instead of seeing black, you see white. And everyone in the world, except for one woman, or at least everyone in the anonymous country the book is set in, goes blind except for one woman. So she has to pretend that she's blind because, the villains are also blind now. No, it's complicated. Anyway, the book, the characters don't have names. They're called, for instance, the girl with X or the guy who whatever. They don't have names. The city doesn't have a name. Like, you can translate it into any language and it works because it's completely devoid of cultural references, except for one point in the story where they raid a supermarket and they say that they're eating chorizo. Now, I'm guessing chorizo isn't very common in America. Like, it's not a thing you eat very, very often, I guess.
Not often. It's kind of like, I guess it's sort of hipsterish food right now. It's like, ooh, chorizo. Is regular sausage not fancy enough for you, Mr. Fancy Pants hipster?
Yeah, in Portugal it's kind of the opposite. Like, chorizo is a rural food. Like, it's what people in like poor people eat, I guess. Well, not everybody eats it, but it's not hipsterish at all. It's like it's what our grandparents eat, and and it's a very Portuguese food, I guess. So that's the one time in the book where people can pick up, where the Portuguese reader will be like, oh, chorizo. Okay, so this is probably happening in Portugal. But yeah, that's the only time. So I think it's interesting that the common reader will pick up on that, like on food. Since we eat food all the time, I guess, everyone will pick up on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, food references are very interesting and hard to do in translation. I usually just leave them untouched, and that's it. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I like hearing about the exotic food or whatever. For me, it's just like, no, I'm an adult. Not everything has to be a hamburger. I'll get over it.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially since like food is such an important part of a culture, and I feel like it kind of robs us if you're making it this bland thing. It's like, I mean, well, like Italians, if you want to like water down any of the food references in an Italian story, it's just like, how dare you? Yeah. They'll come for you, man. Yeah. They will not tolerate that shit.
That's the cool part about writing spec fic too. I can just, make food up. That's cool.
Yeah, that's what's fun, definitely. Another issue of translation, humor.
Oh, yeah, that's the toughest one.
Humor is broad humor. Sex jokes, fart jokes are usually easy to translate, but like subtle humor, a lot of humor is very cultural. Like Oscar Wilde's comedies are very much based on sort of English, especially Victorian English social attitudes, and they just fall apart. Yeah. In a different culture. Just the idea of like, why don't you just tell her your name's not really Ernest? Like, no, I can't. Because I'm English. We don't communicate. Yeah. What are you talking about?
Exactly. Yeah. That
like, just tell her. Like, no.
That specific case does work well in Portuguese, fortunately, because we got forms of address. Like, for instance, you say you for everything in English. Just, even if it's Obama, I don't want to say Trump, but yeah, if it's Obama, you call him you. You might call him, Mr. President, obviously, but the whole Mr. / Sir / Mrs. / whatever is in our verbs in Portuguese. So, yeah, it's actually kind of disturbing because in Portugal, you're getting older when people on the street start using different verb conjugations to speak to you. Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's like people. It's the equivalent of people starting calling you sir, for instance, or ma'am, or
ma'am. Oh
yeah,
no.
So,
yeah, that's the worst.
Yeah,
I got it really young too, and I'm like, shit.
Yeah, exactly. That happens to me a lot, especially at the gym. Random people just be like, "Sir, can you hand me that?" I'm like, "Oh, why am I sir? I'm 29." But yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, but yeah, humor is it's very hard to translate. Yeah, it's I think it's the toughest possibly. Yeah, the biggest difference
sometimes
is probably
there's stuff
humor.
Structurally in the language.
Puns, especially. Puns are the worst. Sometimes.
Oh god, puns are impossible.
Yeah, sometimes they're literally impossible. You can either make a different pun, fine. Sometimes that works, but yeah, most times you can either put a note, like a footnote, which in my translation classes you're encouraged to never ever do unless you really don't have a choice.
Right.
I think it's
kind of a sign of failure, I feel.
Yeah.
Just like, especially with a joke, like asterisk, look at the footnote. Here's why this would be funny.
Yeah,
if you understood it.
Yeah. I think one of the last, I don't read many translated books nowadays because I can't switch off my translated brain when I'm reading, so it ends up ruining the book for me because I'm like, I do this differently. What a shit translator. Right. Yeah, but I remember one of the Harry Potter books. There's this part where Tom Marvolo Riddle, the name of Voldemort, suddenly the letters switch around and it says, "I am Lord Voldemort." And obviously it didn't work that way in Portuguese because the letters are not the same at all. And I noticed that, for instance, what the Brazilian translator did is change the name Tom Marvolo Riddle into some Brazilian sounding name, which to me makes no sense since the character is British, but fine. And in European Portuguese, the translator just gave up and it was like, "I am Lord Voldemort" in Portuguese. Then she added a footnote saying, "By the way, in English, the letters would reconstitute to say this, blah, blah." But so yeah, puns and etc. are the toughest part for sure. I actually unconsciously avoid them. Actually, no, I'm not sure if I avoid them or if I actually do the opposite. But when I'm writing in English and when I'm writing Portuguese, I always have a mind for translation. I'm always thinking, maybe one day I'll be incredibly famous and then I'll have to translate this into Portuguese or have to translate this into English. So every time I'm writing a pun, I'm like, yeah, this is going to come back and bite me when I have to translate it. So sometimes I avoid it and sometimes out of spite, I just use way too many puns. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember working on Aristophanes' Lysistrata, and most of the puns are like sex jokes, and those are actually pretty easy to translate because there are so many different words for penis that like you can find one that fits, and across languages they're pretty similar, the various like jokes and puns that are about that for the most part. But I remember this one that was like impossible to translate, and it was this phrase where basically the story is about the women going on a sex strike to try to force the men to end the war, and women are saying, well, what if we get lonely? And like the pun in the original translates literally to flay the flayed dog. Because I guess, like, sex toys at the time were made with dog leather.
Wow.
But, like, there's no fucking way. That's not a phrase in English. There's nothing. I think the choice I went with was take matters into your own hands.
Yeah.
Because it kind of gets across the idea. Like, I mean, you're going to miss a huge thing about it, but it just gets across the general idea. And it's like, this is a phrase that works in English. But I remember scratching my head and going, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of little puns like that. There's a pun that's like making fun of the name of this one region of Greece. There's a Anagyros, and there's also a really stinky plant.
Yeah.
Named after it. So like the women from Anagyros are arriving, and someone says, "Oh, all of Anagyros has moved," which at the time was a joke that meant like I smell something stinky.
Yeah.
Again, fucking untranslatable. Like most people do a literal translation.
Yeah.
But like I tried to do like a joke translation, which was I thought I smelled something, but then the character comes across as like unreasonably mean. Mm-hmm. Like, wow, what a bitch. What do you have against Anagyros? It's like, no, there's a pun in the original, but like no one's going to pick up on it. Or you could translate the name of the region to like Maladoros. Like, oh, Maladoros, like malodorous, like it's stinky. Like there's no perfect choice that's going to 100% fit a very specific regional pun.
Yeah, for puns, it's next to impossible. It's funny you mentioned swearing, because swearing is, I think it's what I like, it's my favorite part of translating.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because, every language has a limitless potential for swearing, obviously. And sometimes...
and there's a lot of, like, specific cultural swears, too, which is really cool.
One detail I love is every time I have to translate some in English, I don't give a shit. Like that's the expression. In Portuguese, it's literally the opposite expression. When you say it you don't give a shit, you say you give a shit. So, for instance, the phrase would be estou-me a cagar para ti, which means, it depends on how literal you want to be, but it either means I'm shitting myself for you, which sounds horrible in English, yeah, or just
wow,
yeah, or it can mean I'm giving a shit, but it means I'm not giving a shit. So it's it's hilarious to me, that expression. Swearing in general is really fun to translate. Like, for instance, the word that we have for cock, one of the many, many, many words we got for cock.
One of the many.
Yeah, like it's called caralho. And caralho is those those really tall wooden poles on ships. Ships during the Age of Discovery and etc. Like there'd be those sailors.
Like the mast or...
Yeah, the mast. Yeah, but exactly, the mast. And the mast with the basket on top or something. Then there's a dude over there, and he yells, "Oh, I can see land," or "land something, land a hoe," whatever it is in English.
Land hoe in the crow's nest.
Yeah,
I think it's called.
The crow's nest, exactly. So caralho used to mean crow's nest, and we have this expression which is vai pro caralho, which literally translates to go to the crow's nest, and this means go fuck yourself. And it's an expression that, everybody still uses this. It's like one of the most common expressions. And and apparently, because this is the myth, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but the myth is that when sailors were punished, they were sent up to the crow's nest because nobody wanted to be there, obviously. So, go to the crow's nest means go fuck yourself because nobody wants to, be up there. So, Portuguese in general has a lot of nautical expressions. Huh. Yeah, for obvious reasons. Yeah. So, but it's hilarious. Caralho can also mean fuck, as in just general swearing, like fuck, which is funny because when you're thinking people are just yelling cock. So, yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes even like non-swear things or just jokes, sometimes they're just these like standard jokes.
Yeah.
Where just referencing them is itself kind of a weird bit of meta humor. Mm-hmm. And like, again, just a totally untranslatable thing. Like there's that joke template. A lot of people on on Twitter love it, which is, but doctor, I am Pagliacci the clown. Which is, like, how would you do this in another language? Like,
yeah.
I don't know. You either have to find some kind of equivalent template, or I've seen it just not translated at all and given a literal translation, and it's so unintelligible that it kind of becomes a weird, humorous anti-humor.
Yeah.
Like, I know this is a weird thing to cite, but there was this very silly anime called Cromartie High, and, like, it was this joke comedy thing, and a lot of the jokes were based on these these sort of standard Japanese joke templates. And they would just give it a literal translation, and it made no fucking sense in English, and I just found it absolutely delightful watching it. Because it was just the strangest, most absolute nonsense, in that it became, for me, enjoyable simply because I had no idea what the fuck was going on, and that for me was kind of funny and absurd.
Yeah, you know that meme, all your bays are belong to us.
Right.
Yeah, that one. That was a literal translation, probably an automatic translator or something. It's funny you mentioned anime. You know this anime called Ghost Stories?
I think so.
It's a really, really bad anime. Like, it's terrible. And what happened was this: since the anime didn't, it wasn't I hate pronouncing this word, successful at all in Japan. They sold the rights for a nickel or something to some American studio, and they just completely disregarded the script. Like, they didn't even translate it, so they just wrote a new script, and it's just off the walls hilarious because the writers just made up whatever they wanted. So it used to be this really serious show about ghosts and and horror and etc., and they just turned it into a South Park like comedy. So yeah, it's hilarious. Like, everybody should watch that.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. I feel like, too, there's a lot of room for goofing off, just because it's like, well, this anime sucked, no one liked it. Like, you can play with this, no one's going to be mad. The show's 5 fans are not going to mess with us.
Do you know Dragon Ball?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, Dragon Ball is probably the most popular cartoon ever in Portugal. Like, ever. It's insane. Like, if you start singing the intro from any of the series, people on the street will start singing it, like, whatever you are. It's insane. And it was very popular because we didn't have the Japanese translation. We didn't have a Japanese translator at all, apparently, back then in the 90s. So we were using the French translation of the Japanese version. And that was completely unintelligible. Nobody could understand what was there. We couldn't decipher the translation at all. So the writers the actors actually, both the writers and the actors did whatever they wanted. So the Portuguese version of Dragon Ball is full of Portuguese references. Sometimes the characters aren't even saying anything, and the actors just added this. Like random characters just yelling stuff, like making stupid jokes, making Portuguese cultural references, like shows that are on TV back then, etc. And I think that's why the show is so popular, because it was speaking directly to the Portuguese public. So we could see that it wasn't a translation even, it was just Portuguese. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of potential in that approach, because people from English-speaking countries aren't going to feel this. I think this is actually might be one of the biggest cultural divides, is that obviously you got a lot of representation everywhere, books, movies, series.
Right.
In a lot of minor cultures, so to speak, overlooked cultures. Portuguese is one of those, in a way, European Portuguese. If somebody mentions the word Portugal in a movie, everyone in Portugal will perk up. Like, for instance, there's this author called Ricardo Pinto. He's a British author. He just has a Portuguese name because I think his parents are Portuguese, but he doesn't even speak Portuguese. But he was translated into Portuguese only because the marketing behind it was, oh, look at this Portuguese guy, he's translated into English. This was obviously false. It was just, misleading marketing. But it was translated into Portuguese only because his name is Portuguese. And the same goes for this thriller author called Daniel Silva. He's not Portuguese either. I think this one's a bit more famous, Daniel Silva. But he's not Portuguese either, but his books are everywhere in Portugal because his name is Portuguese. So sometimes when there's a lot of potential for simply representing the culture you're like Portuguese culture in this sense, in this context. There's a lot of potential just to represent overlooked cultures, and I'm pretty sure that countries like just mentioning Europe, but for instance, countries like Croatia, or Macedonia, Bulgaria, all those countries that don't have a lot of international representation feel the same.
Yeah, that is a thing that most Americans probably, we don't have that. Like, God, American culture's big everywhere, so it's not like, oh, finally,
exactly.
someone mentioned the United States. I feel so seen.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Going back for a moment to the notion of puns, as frustrating as translating a pun is, something that I find so valuable in it, just as an exercise, is even when you're looking at a silly little joke, a very silly little joke, when you're really trying to work on a pun, you start realizing, okay, two words are not going to have the exact same meaning. Yeah. Even if they're supposedly synonyms, there's not 100% the exact same meaning, because there's going to be a different level of how formal it is. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a different level of, like, is it a slang word? There's going to be different connotations. They're used in different contexts, and simply the sound is going to be different. The people who use it are going to be slightly different audiences. The cultural references behind them are going to be different, and just the sound of it is also going to be different too. And that's also an issue with puns, because you're doing wordplay, you're doing sound-alike words, or even fitting the meter.
Yeah.
And it makes you stop taking words for granted, because one simple little word can, like, have you scratching your head just to fill in the pun. Like, I remember when working on Aristophanes, trying to find the right synonym for dildo and realizing that it was not possible. Yeah. Because it was like the word that fit needed to fit the meter of the line.
Yeah.
And, like, the stress was on the wrong syllable.
Yeah. In poetry, and I was
just like, guys, I need a synonym for dildo. And they're like, vibrator? I'm like, it's ancient Greece. They didn't have vibrators. Come on. Yeah. And you start to appreciate a single silly little word like dildo.
Yeah.
Of, like, how complex it is. Which is a big part of why I think writers really need to, especially fucking Americans, get on it, Americans. Other languages exist. Like, it really forces you to contend with every little word choice in these head-scratchingly frustrating ways that you would never think about before. And just that exercise, I think, makes you a much more careful reader when you're picking a word for a sentence.
Yeah. Nah, puns are the worst to translate for sure. Jesus.
Yeah. And it was so tricky too, because, like, there's a million synonyms for penis, but not very many for dildo.
Yeah, I'm guessing.
Not many.
I'm thinking. I don't think even we don't even have a word in Portuguese for dildo. I think actually, kinda. I think we had a medieval word that translates like wooden cock or something like that. But we just use dildo anyway, like the English word. Yeah. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And even just like a silly word like that, you just think about it so much, and it's just like, oh God, I need to find the right word for dildo. It won't work. It won't fit. Haha, pun.
Yeah.
And it's such a valuable exercise putting yourself through that. Just because when you're writing original fiction now, you're going to look at every word and go, is this really the right word? And it makes you slow down a lot, but that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That is a very good thing. And seeing how many levels there are to a word.
I think it's interesting how, since I speak English as a second language, and not that well, but since I speak English as a second language, English is kind of performative to me. Like, it doesn't sound 100% natural yet, and I don't think it ever will, because I learned English watching movies, playing video games, sometimes reading books, etc. Right. So English to me is a language of entertainment. It's theatrical by nature. It's performative. So it's very difficult for me for something to sound unnatural in English. Like, you can write whatever you want, and to me it'll just be like, okay, there's a cool combination of words, which is probably why my writing can sound a bit uncanny too. Like, I'm aware of it actually. Like, when I write in different styles, I like to play around a lot with English, and I don't know whether Portuguese is interesting enough. So it's because to me it's never going to be my native language, obviously. I like writing in English
Right.
much more than I do in Portuguese now. English has a lot of advantages that work for me. Like, for instance, it's much easier to do alliteration in English, and there's in Portuguese all the words end in 5 vowels, or maybe an R if it's an infinitive verb. So English is very, very flexible and flows really well for me. Obviously, there are things that I miss in Portuguese too, but
Right.
Oh, my cat is here on my lap. 1 second. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
We're a pro cat
Yeah,
podcast.
it actually took him long enough to interrupt the podcast. But yeah, so like, for instance, violence. Like, when I'm reading violent scenes in English, the effect isn't the same for me, because I'm just focusing on how it sounds and the phonemes, or like the sonic effect. Like, I know that crack obviously is a very, very violent word. Like, crack is exactly the sound that bone would make, breaking, etc.
Right.
But it doesn't sound harsh to me in English. It doesn't sound really violent like it would in Portuguese. Like, Portuguese to me is a very violent language. The sounds are just very... There's a lot of and harsh sounds. So yeah, that's interesting to me about speaking it as a single language. And the same is going to happen with translations. It's always going to be an element of performance, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Which brings me to another point. Sorry, that's what I was trying to get with this rambling. Is that a lot of people will tell you, like, when you're bilingual, they will say, "Oh, I just rather read the book in the original language." La la la. People say this a lot, especially here in Portugal, because most people speak at least a modicum of English, so they kinda can read books in English. And for instance, when it comes to spec fic, we don't have a lot of translated spec fic, so we feel like, I don't know, whoever it is, like Brandon Sanderson. No, actually, Brandon Sanderson does have a lot of translated books, but any other author, I.N.M. Banks, for instance. If you like I.N.M. Banks, you'll have to read him in English, period. And people say, like, yeah, I just like to read the original books better because you always lose something in translation, etc. That's true, but reading in your native language is it's irreplaceable, because it's the language your reality is set in. Like, your second language is always going to be the language of entertainment, so to speak. Like, you're always focused on the language itself. Things don't sound as real as they will in your native language, unless you're natively bilingual, obviously. So yeah, so I think there's a lot of value in reading translations, even if you do speak the other language, because yeah, obviously this doesn't matter that much to most people who speak English as a native language, because I might be mistaken, but I think most English speakers are monolingual. So so they have to read translations anyway. But for people who have the option of either reading the original book or reading a translation, I think there's a lot of value in just reading the translation, even if some things are lost in translation, which they are. But what you can gain by reading your native language is much, much better. So yeah, it's going to be a much richer experience.
Yeah. It's just, it feels more like home.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess.
Yeah.
And you're not like translating in your head. It's just there.
Yeah.
Right. We've talked a lot about word choice, but there's an issue when you're translating of not words, but sort of the grammar of the language. You've already mentioned endings on these suffixes in Portuguese. And there's a lot of little things like that between languages where it's not just the word choice, but also the structure of the language, the structure of the words, the structure of the sentence. And sometimes here we also run into these untranslatable issues.
Especially in poetry. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like in Greek, ancient Greek had really versatile sentence structure. You could put words into a lot of different orders and like split clauses up in all these ways. And poets, of course, took advantage of that and did that as much as possible because it just shows this real creativity of language.
Yeah.
And you just can't do that in English at all. So you end up with these kind of more straightforward sentence structures because it's just impossible to do the things in English. And unfortunately, there's bits where you almost lose meaning. I'm thinking of this one example in Euripides' play, Trojan Women. Mm-hmm. There's this passage where Euripides sticks the word fear in a line so that the phrase first seems like it's somebody saying, I don't tolerate fear, but because the sentence keeps going, what it ends up meaning is I don't tolerate, I don't abide people who fear.
Yeah.
And it's this really sharp turn of phrase because it leads you down, oh, it means this. Oh, wait, it means this other thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
But I don't, like, English isn't going to, you can't do that in the same way because you can't, like, put the object sort of in the middle of the sentence and then change it what it is. It's like, okay, we're at the object. Generally, we're near the end.
Yeah.
You can't keep going for another 5 lines. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, when you come across that, like, how do you do that? And my favorite extreme example of it is this ancient Chinese poem called Star Gauge. It's by a poetess named Su Hui. And because of the structure of Chinese, like, a character's position can change the meaning, and you have a lot of different readings of each character. And she wrote this poem that's, I think, a grid that's, like, I think 26 characters by 26 characters, and you can read it left to right, up and down, diagonal, in a spiral, in, like, a series of 9 panels, zigzags, and it all has a different meaning each time, and it all means something. It's not gibberish.
Yeah.
And the way it is there are something like thousands of different potential ways to read this poem.
Wow. Yeah, you can do it in Portuguese
way to
either.
do this. It is impossible. It is literally impossible to do this in English.
Yeah. Yeah, in Portuguese, I don't think you'd be able to do that either. Even though we do have a bit of more flexibility where we put our verbs and a subject.
Right.
But yeah, you can't do that either. Yeah, that I don't even know how I translate that. I think I just give up, change job.
Yeah, I've seen attempts at English, and instead of, like, being word to word, it's like phrase to phrase. But even then, you're missing it. Yeah. Even then, you're still much more limited because you just can't.
Yeah.
It is an incredibly complex poem.
I think there's this book. I don't remember the original language. It might be English, even though I think it was French, where the author just didn't use the letter A, I think. It just...
Right!
Yeah, and I know the translations all follow that, but obviously it's different letters. So they would avoid using the most common letter in the alphabet, because I think that's what the original author did.
Oh, wow.
I think I remember I think the Spanish translation kind of cheated, and they avoided using the second most common letter on the alphabet.
Oh.
But yeah, I'm always thinking, how the hell would you translate that? Like, especially in Portuguese,
right.
We love vowels. Like, words end in vowels all the time. Like, most words end in vowels, and we have gendered words too. So you can't. You have to. If you avoid letter A, you literally can't use the feminine version of a lot of words, for instance. So
wow.
Yeah, so you'd have to delete the whole gender in the word. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Gender is such another interesting thing in a language. Some languages will have, like, multiple, more than 2. Some have none. I know there's this one Aristophanes play where there's this really important series of jokes about gendered language, which just isn't a thing in English, because he's holding up a bird and he's like, oh, this is a bird. It's a whole joke about the way nouns are gendered in Greek.
Yeah.
Which
they are,
doesn't work at all in English. He's like, this is bird and this is birdetta or something.
Yeah, exactly,
like, I don't fucking,
yeah,
you're out of luck, dude.
Yeah, and that's how it works in Portuguese too. It's terrible in translation. Like, for instance, we don't have the gender neutral pronouns, like how they use they in English. We literally don't have that option. We just use the plural as plural. So if we use they, we're talking about multiple people. In a couple contexts, I think you can do that, but for the most part, you can't use the gender neutral in Portuguese is the same as the masculine, but obviously since that's also masculine, a lot of people don't like it. So, for instance, when they say a sentence that would be like, they are going to the shop. In English, it's neutral, period. Like, they, it's neutral. Whatever you're using it for, plural, you don't know if they mean multiple men, multiple women, multiple, whatever it is. So, in Portuguese, the plural, the neutral, would be eles, which also means they, but the masculine version of they. So, that's really complicated. Like, for instance, when I'm writing in English, I always have a mind for translation. I'm thinking, as I mentioned before, what if I have to translate this in the future? So it's really difficult for me to use the gender neutral they. I feel kind of limited because I'm thinking, what if when I translate this in Portuguese, how the hell am I going to do this? Like, literally can't do this. Like, it's impossible. Right. Unless people accept that, grammatically speaking, the masculine is also neutral, but obviously and I understand their point, a lot of people don't like that because it's, it's still masculine. What people do sometimes is, you know how Latinos use Latin X to mean,
right.
Some people do stuff like that, but I do have a bit of an issue with that sort of approach because, and this is gonna, I know this isn't very common, but software for blind people can't read that sort of thing yet, at least.
Oh, yeah.
And since I work for a couple companies and I have to pay attention to accessibility translations and stuff like that, and we in Portugal, what we usually do is that the eles, the they, you'd put an at instead of the last e. So the at would mean that it can be both an e for male or an a for female. Just an at means both. But the software for visually impaired people can't read it. So you end up creating another problem. So gender neutrality and etc. It's really, really, really complicated to do that.
Gender in general. Yeah, it's complicated. It doesn't translate well, and a lot of the time it's political in one culture in a way that it's not.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know Joanne Harris, the author?
Right.
Yeah, so Joanne Harris, this is going to be a spoiler for the listeners out there, so if you don't want spoilers for... I actually don't know the name of the book now, so I'm going to spoil a book. I don't even remember the title. Yeah. But she's got this book where for most of the story... she's using, in English, I'm guessing she's using they, or she just, since it's first person, she's not even using any pronouns that you can see if they're male or female.
Right.
So, and there's this huge plot twist, because at the end of the book, you notice that the narrator is actually a woman. She makes it seem like it's a male narrator, and then there's something in the story later happens, and you're like, oh my god. So, okay, so this all makes sense looking back. She was a woman. And in Portuguese... The translator literally couldn't do that, so she just used the male form the entire book, so the twist was completely impossible to predict because she's literally using male conjugation. So to me the twist was like, what and how? Like I was reading the book, it's just all the verb forms are male or the nouns are male, etc. So it makes no sense. So like sometimes it's literally impossible to translate. She had to put a footnote. The translator had to put a footnote at the end being like, I'm sorry, ruining the twist, but literally no way. Okay.
Otherwise you'd give away the entire twist and the novel would just be like, it's so boring.
I don't envy her position.
Yeah, or I remember hearing about, I don't remember the name of the story, but there was a sci-fi story, I believe, written in the 60s, and this was like at a big movement toward more gender-neutral language. Language was way more gendered in the 60s, especially with professional nouns like aviator, aviatrix, actor, actress. There was like way more of that stuff. And feminists were trying to move toward a more like gender-neutral noun use. So the original writer, who was very much a feminist, used very gender-neutral nouns. But then a Polish translator, the thing is, in Polish, apparently, it was very much the opposite. The standard traditional was a lot more gender-neutral, and like the feminist movement was trying to deliberately use more feminine nouns and more feminine titles as a way to like make women more visible. And like make the status of professional women more like big and open, and saying like, no, women are part of society and women are doing stuff. So in order to like keep the spirit of the translation or the spirit of the original work, what the translator had to do was effectively do the opposite, and instead of taking away gender, like making more gender in the language, just because it's like, that's literally not what they're doing, but like very clearly the intent was like sort of the feminist thing to do, and this is what the feminist thing to do is in this target language, and I find that so interesting.
Well, that reminds me, since in Portuguese the neutral is also male, but since a lot of people don't like that, understandably. For instance, in college, if there's like 15 people in a classroom and one of them is a guy, you're going to use the male form to refer to all of them. So you say, like for instance,
I think that's the case in French too.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember learning about that in French class and being very upset.
Yeah, exactly. Because traditionally, I think it came from Latin and it's supposed to be neutral, but obviously that's not how people see it, and that's completely normal that it's not how people see it. And so in this case, my teacher would say something like, my professor would say something like amigos, which means friends, but it's the male form. So the female form would be amigas. So it ends with an A instead of with a O. And what some of my feminist professors started doing is, if there were more women than men in the class, they'd use the female form. And I was like, okay, actually, that's actually a good approach, I guess. Like, that works well. I'm not because some of my friends would be offended, like my male friends would be like, what? And she's calling us girls? Because technically, the female would only work if there were only women in the classroom. So they were like, what? I'm not a girl. What is she calling me female friend for? Like, I'm not a girl. So, but I think that's one possible approach, just... there's not going to be an easy answer for this kind of stuff ever, I think, unless you completely change Portuguese grammar, which is not going to happen, I think.
Unless you completely change your culture and your culture's attitude toward gender.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a lot to ask a translator.
Yeah, and there are positive steps. Like, obviously, I don't much care. I don't think it's a big issue in any case, because to me, the male should be read as neutral, but people can. People read it as male, and you can't just change people's minds, obviously. But there are some positive steps. Like, for instance, if you say, let me think of an example. The word for worker, one of the words for worker, like funcionário, which means someone who's working at some space, like whatever, it doesn't matter, like somebody who cleans the university or something, like I'm forgetting the word in English, like what do you call somebody who just...
Laborer?
Kind of like labor, works. Not exactly the same, but nowadays people do like funcionários and funcionárias, so they use both. So like saying ladies and gentlemen, it's kind of like that, but for every gendered word. And even though it makes us very verbose if we have to do that every time, I think it's not a bad option, to be fair. It avoids the awkward having to insert at and ironically exclude people who have to use software for visually impaired reading, etc. So but it's a difficult subject because there's not going to be one solution, and obviously then politics get in the way too when one side of the other, and the other obviously. Because some people take this very, very seriously. But but in translation, that's, as a translator only, it's just difficult in general, and I hate it. Like, I'd hate having to translate something like with gender neutral pronouns, because I'd feel like whatever my choice would be, I'd be disrespecting the author. I can't use the plural today because it doesn't work in Portuguese. If I use the male / neutral, a lot of people won't read it as neutral, understandably, so it's going to be disrespectful too, because I'd be erasing their identity. So it's scary for me, especially as a non-native speaker. Like the whole pronouns thing is it's a minefield for me, because I understand it, I agree with it. I think it's a beautiful solution for people who don't conform to what's the word? My English is slipping out. But who
don't conform to the gender binary, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. You don't conform to the traditional model, I guess. That's a beautiful solution. A solution that unfortunately we don't have in Portuguese. But it's a minefield for me because I'm always afraid of, saying the wrong thing or etc.
Right. Yeah, it is tricky. It's like it's a highly politicized thing, but like sometimes the language you're translating it into just doesn't have that whole debate, doesn't have whatever, all of that stuff, and there's just this thing that's missing, and there's not really a perfect solution. Because
sometimes a person's linguistic ability evolves quicker than her cultural knowledge.
Yeah, that's so hard.
Yeah.
I think Paul Verhoeven ran into that, funny enough, I think while filming RoboCop. Yeah. There's this one line where a guy says to these two sex workers that he's hanging out with for the evening, well, the character says it, bitches leave. And I think it was like, improvised, but they decided to go with it because it's this great line and it shows what an asshole this guy is. But the director, Paul Verhoeven, he's not a native English speaker. He didn't realize how rude the word bitches is at the time. So he just started addressing the two actresses as bitches. So like, okay, bitches, let's try that again from the beginning. Okay, bitches, I need you to go stand over there. And okay, bitches, your makeup's getting kind of messed up. We need you. Like, he had no idea that he was just insulting them so badly the whole time. And of course, like, he's the director. These are these girls. They're trying not to yell at him because they don't want to damage their career. Yeah. And meanwhile, all the American actors who are on the scene are like stifling laughs because it's like the most hilarious thing. This guy, like, very innocently saying, okay, bitch number one, I need you to, let's touch up your makeup. Bitch number two, okay, can we get hair in here? Fix your hair. Okay, bitches, thank you very much, bitches. You're doing a great job, bitches. It's like... America, not everybody's American.
Yeah.
We don't expect everybody to fucking understand American culture. The whole world isn't American. Yeah. Come on, you guys. And I feel like that's one of the other reasons why I want writers, especially English language writers, to try writing translations, because it's like you really need to have the experience, if just for a little while, that everybody else on Earth has. Yeah. Please step outside of your English language brain for a couple of hours. And like, I don't think like Americans and English language speakers quite get just like how it's not normal for everybody else, like that our culture, our language is kind of everywhere, and that's not the case for everybody else. And I don't necessarily think that's good for us, because it means we can be blind to a lot of things.
I remember
without even knowing it.
Yeah, I remember also on Twitter somebody referred to Idris Elba. Is that how you pronounce his name? The actor Idris Elba. Idris. Yeah, so. Idris Elba. Anyway, they referred to him as African American, and he's British. Oh, yeah, they're like, it's not black, he's African American. They were like, no, he's British, like, he's not American at all.
He's British.
Yeah, so, yeah, we don't actually have the word African American, African Portuguese in Portugal. We don't use it. Yeah, just, Portuguese, period. So you might say black Portuguese, if anything, but people don't usually do that. I don't think you can even use that distinction in like news or something. We don't have legally, we don't have any kind of distinction. So, which, is both good and bad, I guess. And there are some advantages to that. Our system is completely colorblind. Obviously, at the same time, that can, completely make us forget about certain institutional problems. But yeah, so that's another subject. But yeah, no, it's completely different. Yeah, but the African American thing stuck to me because of like, but isn't he British? Why are they saying African American? Like, is black offensive?
Right.
But yeah.
Right. Getting back to translation, I think a lot comes down to, I think, how much can we ask of the reader? How much should we ask of the reader or the audience? Like, can we or should we expect them to sort of shake out of their comfort zone a little bit? Or, like, are we pandering to them if we keep them in their comfort zone, question. Or do we want to slap them in the face?
Yeah.
I think it was Ken Liu said, like, when he writes translations of Chinese sci-fi to English, he doesn't try to make them sound natural in English, because he's like, no, I want you to be confronted with the fact that this is from a different culture, and I want you to sort of learn to deal with that.
Did he translate the Three-Body Problem? Was that him?
Yeah.
Yeah, I DNF'd that book, not because of the translation. Translation is actually clearly really, really, really good. Like, the prose flows really well. So if he's not trying to sound natural, then I think he did something wrong, because it sounds completely natural to me. Like, the prose is incredible. But I just didn't like the book that much. Like, I hated the characters, I guess. But Yeah, regarding your question, I think it really depends on the book. Like, for instance, if I'm translating Dan Brown, I'm not gonna make it hard for the reader. Like, I'm not gonna be like, oh, yeah, yeah. I'm just gonna simplify everything if I need to. Try to make it as easy for a Portuguese reader as it is for an English reader. But then if I'm translating, well, I don't know. No, I don't know. But, N.K. Jemisin or something like that. Like, I'm translating somebody who asks a bit more of the reader. I actually haven't read her book, so maybe I'm just saying random shit. But if I'm translating an author that requires a bit more of the reader, then I won't make it easy either. I might make it easy here and there if it's just completely incomprehensible. But I think it just really, really depends on the book. If it's an easy book, you should make it easy for the reader. If it's a hard book, even in the native language, than in the original language, then I think it's fine to make it hard also. Just, try and stick to it a little bit closer. So yeah, that's the short answer of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, for some people, this is going to sound like a real nerdish thing to say, but for some people, the learning process is actually fun. Like, I like reading, I like having to work a little bit for it. Yeah, that's the reason I bought a Kindle, actually, because I can press on the words and be like, oh, this word means this. Oh, maybe it's a reference to something, and then I'm going to Google it, and etc. Yeah, and I think the book being a little bit demanding can be fun.
Yeah, definitely. And I do enjoy when I'm reading something that's a bit foreign, like that feeling of foreignness.
Yeah.
It's wonderful, and I like kind of being shaken out of what I'm used to. Like, I find it's so easy for me, at least, to just stick with American writing.
Yeah.
So when I read something that's very much not American, it's so refreshing.
Yeah.
It feels so different in a really, really, really good way. And I would really hate it if works translated for Western audiences all kind of lost that.
Yeah. I wish the American market was a bit more open to translations in general, because I can understand why they're not, because, you have so many good books already, like written by Americans and, English people and, Anglophones in general. So you don't really need to read translations. You have a plethora of beautiful things already. But I do wish it was a little bit more open, because I avoid writing in Portuguese because I know I'm not going anywhere with it. I think the top earning author in Portugal, the SFF author, has sold maybe 50,000 books ever, across the entire series, and they're 8 books or something. So that's the top earner, yeah. Like, even if I'm wrong by various orders of magnitude, I'm completely sure he hasn't sold more than 100,000 across the entire series, and I'm pretty sure he's not even sold that. So sometimes translation or writing in your second language directly, which is also a form of translation, I guess, as it's the only option for a lot of writers. Fortunately, it's becoming more common, even though it can be a little bit discouraging when people ask, oh, do you know an example of a second language writer who's made it, who's got, sold, can write really well, and who sold this shit, and etc. And people always go like, yeah, you don't have to worry, Nabokov was a second language writer. And and they're like, yeah, okay, thank you.
That was 60 years ago, man.
Yeah,
do you have anything more recent?
Thank you for comparing me to a genius author. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that is a high bar. Just be as good as Nabokov. That's fine.
Yeah,
sure, no fucking problem.
I just forgot his name, but the dude from Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad, yeah. And they're like, oh yeah, well, Joseph Conrad also spoke it as a second language. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that helps a lot. Like, I want to know about, actually living authors who are working nowadays. So, and who made it. God. There aren't many, because, I'm not insecure about it anymore, fortunately. Not very insecure, at least. I do avoid a couple things when writing in English, which can actually be good. Like, for instance, I can't describe a bus stop, like a random example. If I had to physically describe a bus stop, it's a rectangular thing with blah blah, I can't do that. At all, I'll fail at it. It's not going to sound natural. So I do avoid a couple things. But they're things I don't have to, they're not useful anyway. So ironically, speaking as a second language helps me avoid a lot of fluff that I don't need. Because the mundane is the hardest thing for me to write and to translate.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can be good, actually. And there's a lot of advantages of either translating your own stuff or writing as a second language. I think you end up whether you want to or not, you're gonna end up sounding more original. And since I'm not I don't feel stuck in the rules. I feel I can just stray from the language whenever I want. That was my learning process, was just making mistakes. So now I'm aware of what's a mistake for the most part, and I can make it on purpose and be like, yeah, this is a mistake, but it sounds pretty. And obviously it's very hard to do that in our native languages, because you're just gonna feel kind of like imprisoned by it, like limited.
All right, so why don't we wrap it up? We've talked for a while, but thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Where can our listeners find your work?
Okay, so for the most part, my work, unfortunately, is not written under my name, and I got an NDA, so I can't even disclose it, because I used to work as a ghostwriter. But okay, I haven't written much lately, but if you do want to take a look at at an example, you can find me on Strange Horizons with the 3 Knights of the Half Gent. You can just type that in my name, or Pseudopod with All My Nightmares Are Named Heather, a horror story. So just write Pseudopod, Mário Coelho, or Strange Horizons, Mário Coelho, and you'll instantly find it. Yeah, that's the only thing I gotta plug.
Okay.
If you do like it, just
and we can put links to that in the episode description too.
All right, cool. Okay, then.
All right, and how about where can people find you on social media and stuff? Do you have a website?
1 second. I'm probably gonna end up deleting Twitter eventually because I hate it. But yeah, if you do want to find me on social media, you can find me on Twitter at MSEABRACOELHO, because it's my name, M. Seabra Coelho, but this is unpronounceable. So yeah, just type it out like this, I guess. So yeah, not making it easy for the audience.
Good. We're asking a lot of our audience. That's good. We're not going to coddle them by giving them words they can spell.
Yeah. Okay then. So yeah, and if you do if you want to send me feedback or just general thoughts on the story, my PMs are open, so that's fine.
Okay. Well, thanks a bunch for coming on. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. It was nice.
All right. And that is all for this episode. If you like what you heard, head on over to patreon.com/Rite Gud and subscribe. Supporters get early access to regular episodes, bonus episodes, and some of my own original fiction. Thanks to Surgeryhead for creating our new theme song. Be sure to join us next time when we talk about unlikable female characters. Until then, keep writing good.
KittySneezes.com in color.